The Lindbergh baby kidnapping of 1932 had a profound impact on the nation in several ways. Charles Lindbergh was one of the most famous people in the world. If even his child could be abducted from a guarded, secluded estate in New Jersey, how could any average parent feel secure? During the 1920s and 1930s, a series of ransom kidnappings terrified the public and created a climate of fear that was very real. In 1933 alone, there were 8 high-profile abduction cases nationwide, including William Ham from the beer-producing family, who was freed after paying $100,000 ransom. In addition, the Great Depression radically transformed the social, economic, and cultural heart of the nation. These were hard times in America. The nation's streets were full of idle, desperate men, unable to provide even the most basic needs for their families. Though the Prohibition era ended in 1933, it helped to create an atmosphere of anger and lawlessness that dominated the media's attention for a decade. Almost every day, newspapers were filled with stories of criminal mayhem. Crime was up, confidence was down. And worst of all, things didn't look well for the future. In the tranquil city of San Jose, California, Alex J. Hart ran a profitable retail business called L. Hart & Son Company for generations. The Harts were a true American success story. A Jewish immigrant family who came to the United States with nothing in their pockets and through hard work and sacrifice built a new and better life. The youngest son, Brooke Hart, 22, was the heir apparent to take charge of the family business. He was young, ambitious, and expected to become the leader of the next generation of Harts. Unfortunately, his family's wealth also made him a prime target for kidnapping. In November 1933, Brooke Hart was abducted in broad daylight just yards away from his father's store. It would be the first step for a city's rapid descent into madness and murder. By 1933, the Hart department store was somewhat of a tradition in the city of San Jose, a small, tranquil metropolis 350 miles north of Los Angeles. It was located at the intersection of Market Street and Santa Clara Street, just 2 blocks from City Hall and 2 blocks from the county jail in the opposite direction. There was a convenient parking garage directly across the street for customer parking, and the San Jose Teachers College was only a 5-minute walk to the east. Since it opened its doors in the 1860s, Hart's was a wonderful and economical place to shop. The store was a wide-open, spacious 2-story enterprise where housewives from all over Alameda and Santa Clara counties came to search through Hart's huge inventory for the bargain of the week. Hart's was opened by Leopold Hart in 1866 and had been at the same location ever since. His son, Alex J. Hart, took over the store when the father passed on. He continued to be successful and became a respected and active member of the community. Alex dreamed of the day when his own son would inherit the business his father gave to him. In 1911, Alex had a son and named him Brooke, after his mother. When Brooke was a little boy, his father began to train him in the retail business. Brooke worked as a stock boy while he was still in grammar school. He became a cashier, a bookkeeper, and later a sales clerk. Brooke learned from the ground up, which was the way his father wanted it. "My father had taken me into the business in the same way," Alex Hart later told reporters, "and we had looked forward to the day when Brooke would take an active part in the conduct of the store." By the time Brooke became a teenager, he probably knew more about Hart's, which by then employed over 200 people, than anyone in the company. Hart's continued to do well, even in hard economic times. The Hart family built a stunning home in the city of San Jose, one of the most lavish in the county. The Victorian-style mansion, with its 2-story white columns, sat high up on a hill and was surrounded by lush, extravagant gardens. Its lawns were impeccably groomed, and people frequently passed by its iron gates in the summer just to admire its palatial grounds. Brooke entered Santa Clara University in 1929, where he excelled as a student and in sports, particularly tennis. Just 18 years old, Brooke was a handsome young man. He stood almost 6 feet tall, with the trim build of an athlete. His wavy blonde hair and blue eyes made him especially attractive to the single girls of San Jose, and he was considered the city's most desirable bachelor. Brooke had a friendly, mischievous personality and was well liked. Since Brooke worked in his father's store practically his entire life, just about every citizen in San Jose knew him. That was because just about every one of San Jose's 60,000 citizens shopped at Hart's. Brooke was a familiar sight in the city's streets that year. He had bought a brand new green 1933 Studebaker Roadster, and the speedy car was the envy of many young men in San Jose. On the evening of November 9, 1933, Alex J. Hart was due to attend a dinner meeting with Chamber of Commerce friends at a San Jose country club. The function was set for about 6 p.m. Alex made plans for Brooke to leave work early, walk over to a nearby garage, get the car, and then drive him to the club, which was only a short distance away. This was a happy time for both father and son, since Brooke was given a promotion only a month before. It was a high moment in my life when I took Brooke into the department store recently as vice president, Senior Hart later said to the press. At 5:55 p.m., Brooke told his father he would be right back and walked out onto Market Street toward the lot where his Studebaker was parked. It was the last moment Alex Hart would ever see his son alive. John Jack Holmes was born in Los Angeles on March 20, 1904. When he was 11, his family moved to San Jose, where John's father opened a tailor shop in downtown San Jose. He worked hard and soon became a proud member of the city's business community. San Jose, resting in the southern peninsula of Santa Clara Valley, was considered a smaller version of the larger and more exciting San Francisco to the north. Roads that went through or passed near San Jose were, at that time, the only land access routes to the San Francisco area. The famous Golden Gate Bridge was not yet built, though by the winter of 1933, construction was well underway. San Jose was the kind of place where most people knew everybody else in the city. As a teenager, Jack attended San Jose High School, where he excelled as a football star. He was a big boy, over 6 feet tall, and knew how to take care of himself. After an argument with a teacher, Jack was kicked out of school. However, he was somewhat ambitious and immediately got a job in an electronics store. By the time he was 20, Jack had married a local girl and settled down to married life. Jack Holmes had an outgoing personality and made friends easily. By 1928, he had 2 children and moved to a place called Half Moon Bay, a deserted village on the Pacific side of San Mateo County. He worked in a local gas station where local toughs and petty criminals frequently stopped by and chatted with the gregarious attendant. Holmes became fascinated with outlaws and what he saw as their exciting lives. He frequently mused over dreams of committing the perfect crime. In Henry Farrell's book, Swift Justice, the author said, he would pore over the newspapers, analyzing the crimes reported and the errors that led to the perpetrator's detection. In his mind, Holmes must have thought he could commit crimes that would make him lots of money and not get caught. But during this time, Holmes kept these thoughts to himself. He was never arrested or charged with any crime. In 1932, while Holmes worked as a salesman for an oil company, he made a scheduled stop at a San Jose gas station. The attendant at that time was a man named Thomas Harold Thurmond. The 2 men quickly became friends. Though they were different in personality and temperament, they shared a common bond. They liked money. Harold was born on a farm in 1906 and moved to San Jose with his family when he was 11 years old. He later dropped out of high school and worked in a series of low-paying jobs in and around San Jose. The Thurmond family was well known, and all of Harold's 5 sisters either married well or obtained good jobs. Harold was the exception in the family and was considered somewhat of a disappointment. Though he frequently hung around with San Jose's criminal element, like Holmes, he had never been arrested. But together, Thurmond and Holmes decided to try to make some fast money. Using Holmes's inside information on the oil company, they planned the abduction of a courier who worked for the Union Oil Company. On September 25, 1933, they kidnapped and robbed the employee. The victim was released unharmed, and the 2 men split $716, which was a large sum of money during the Depression era. Barely 1 month later, on October 23rd, Thurmond and Holmes robbed a Shell Oil Company messenger and made off with $700. Again, the victim was not hurt, but Holmes had temporarily fulfilled one of his fantasies. He had gotten away with the perfect crime. Twice. It was time to move on to bigger and better things. After waiting 30 minutes for his son to return, Alex Hart grew very nervous. He knew that if the car broke down or it had a flat tire, Brooke would have simply walked back to the store to let his father know the trouble. Furthermore, Alex also was aware that Brooke had another appointment to make at 6:30. He would never leave his father standing in front of the store without notifying him he would be delayed. Assuming that Brooke had some other pressing business, Alex Hart left the store and got a ride to the meeting. Afterward, when he discovered that Brooke had never arrived home, Alex Hart notified the police that his son had disappeared. For the next few hours, the family's concern grew as it became apparent that no one, not even his closest friends, knew where Brooke was. At about 9:45 that evening, the phone rang at the Harts' residence. Brooke's sister, Elise, 18, took the call. A man told her that Brooke had been taken and was being held for ransom. The caller demanded $40,000 in cash. He said that further instructions would follow. If the police were notified, he added, Brooke would be killed. Alex Hart called San Jose Police Chief John Black. He notified San Francisco of the kidnapping and put out an all-points bulletin for Brooke's green 1932 Studebaker Roadster. The FBI, then known as the Department of Justice, installed phone recording devices in the Hart home and notified the phone company to be ready to trace future phone calls. An agent was also placed inside the residence to monitor developments. Later that same night, an employee of Hart's found Brooke's Studebaker abandoned in the hills north of San Jose. The lights were on, but there was no sign of Brooke. On Saturday, November 11th, after nearly 2 days of waiting, the Harts went public and made an appeal through the newspapers. Worn by hours of anxiety but calm, the San Francisco Chronicle reported, Alexander J. Hart today granted his first interview regarding the disappearance of his son. He described Brooke as a fine young man and said he never had any trouble with him. Brooke is of exceptional character, he told reporters. We have been wonderful pals. Why, many times the boy offered to take me to the football games instead of going with young friends. Later that same day, Brooke's wallet was found on the railing of a ship that had been in San Francisco Bay refueling the Lure Line, an ocean cruiser headed for Mexico. Speculation grew that Brooke was being held captive on board. Alameda County Police and FBI agents hopped a plane flight to Los Angeles, where the Lure Line was due to arrive at its last stop in the States. In L.A., police took a fast skiff 10 miles offshore and met the ship. While several hundred passengers had to stand by, a stem-to-stern search was conducted. Baseball legend Babe Ruth was one of the passengers, on his way to a college football game. After hours of searching every nook and cranny of the huge ocean liner, no trace of Brooke was found. Hunt for Hart fails on liner, no new clues, said the San Francisco Chronicle. The weekend passed with no word about the fate of Brooke Hart. On Monday afternoon, Alex Hart received a letter which was postmarked in Sacramento on November 11th. It was a note from the kidnappers. According to the FBI report, it read, "One more peep to police will be his finish," it said. "You have made one squawk, another will be too bad. We will have $40,000. Put it in a satchel, black. Be ready to take a week's trip on an hour's notice. Get the stewed roadster, have radio installed. When told to go, you will take orders from RPO, a local radio station. You better do as told." On November 15th, after the Harts had received several other false contacts from people who tried to extort money from the family, a second letter from the kidnappers was received. In this long and detailed communication, Alex Hart was ordered to take the $40,000 in cash and drive alone in the Studebaker toward Los Angeles. If he agreed to this arrangement, the numeral 2 was to be written on a large sign and placed in a window in Hart's department store. Alex Hart was willing to comply, but unfortunately, he had never learned how to drive a car. The sign was placed in the window with an additional note. Accordingly, the FBI report said, the numeral 2 was placed in the window, but in view of the fact that Mr. Hart could not drive a car, in large black letters were printed the words, "I cannot drive." By early evening, the kidnappers had gotten the message because at 8 p.m., the phone at the Hart residence rang. It was someone who claimed to be holding Brooke captive. The FBI agent in the home listened in on the call while the phone operator began to relay the caller's location to the police on another line. The FBI report on the phone call recited the conversation. "Is this Mr. Hart?" "Yes," he replied. "Mr. Hart, you had our serial number in the window this afternoon." "Yes, it was there. I can't drive." Mr. Hart, you get some member of your family and leave PDQ. I can't drive, and I'm in no physical condition to make a trip. Mr. Hart, I want your answer, the voice insisted. Yes or no, will you go? I'm willing to deal with you, Hart pleaded, to do anything in my power to get my boy back, but I'm unable to leave now. The man insisted that the switch had to be made now. Hart would have to find someone to drive the car, but the money had to be paid tonight. While the conversation continued, police were notified that the call was being made from a payphone at a garage on South Market Street in downtown San Jose. Within seconds, a dozen cops, including Santa Clara County Police Chief William J. Emig, were speeding toward the location. In the meantime, Alex Hart stonewalled the man on the phone. I want to deal with you, he assured the caller. To be fair, but I can't go. I'm ill. Can't we get somebody that will be satisfactory to you as a go-between? Well, who would we get? The caller asked. I don't know, somebody you name, or I can name somebody. Mr. Hart, I've got orders from headquarters. The voice turned angry. And this is the last time. This is your last chance. That's all I can say. Will you go or not? If you don't go now, it will be just too bad. No, I won't go. I haven't any assurance that you have the boy. Can't you give me any assurance? We have your boy. Will you leave now? The caller was getting angrier by the minute, but Alex Hart dragged out the conversation as long as he could. Well, where should I go? When? He said. Follow the instructions of that letter this afternoon. Leave for Los Angeles in the car. Your boy will be returned. How do I know I'll get my boy, or where? Just then, the police pulled up outside the plaza garage. They saw a man talking on the phone with his back facing them. He never noticed the gang of very excited police officers until they were almost on top of him. As they opened the door to the booth, the caller hung up. When he turned around, he was face to face with Chief Emig. What's your name? The chief shouted. Harold Thurmond, the frightened man replied. Thurmond was taken over to the San Jose jail where he was questioned by police and FBI agents. At first, he denied any involvement in the kidnapping and said he was on the phone with a friend whose name he couldn't remember. Then he changed his story and said he was talking to his mother. But FBI agents would not relent, and soon Thurmond gave in. This subject was thoroughly questioned from 8 o'clock Wednesday night, November 15, 1933, the FBI reports read, until about 2:30 a.m. He finally admitted that he had been mixed up in this scheme to kidnap Brooke Hart and outlined briefly that he and Jack Holmes had kidnapped Hart and driven him up to the San Mateo Bridge where they had bound him up and tossed the victim into the San Francisco Bay. Thurmond gave a detailed description of the crime, and police learned for the first time that Brooke had been killed within an hour after the abduction at the parking garage. As Brooke got into his car, Holmes, armed with a handgun, was already waiting for him by the exit gate. When Brooke slowed for the exit, Holmes jumped in the Studebaker and plunged the gun into the young man's side. I was parked in Jack Holmes's Chevrolet coach on Market Street, Thurmond told police, and I saw Jack Holmes drive by in Brooke Hart's Studebaker Roadster, and according to directions, I followed that car. About 10 miles from San Jose, in a town called Milpitas, they pushed Hart into the back of the Chevy and drove to the San Mateo Bridge. Brooke Hart was ordered out of the car, Thurmond said. Jack Holmes walked back of the car and hit him over the head with a brick I had obtained in San Jose before we started. Hart hollered, "Help! Help!" But Jack Holmes hit him over the head again with the brick and knocked Brooke Hart unconscious. And then I took some baling wire and bound his arms around his body and his abdomen. Jack Holmes then took hold of the upper part of Brooke Hart's body, and I took hold of him from his knees down, and together we lifted him onto the railing of the San Mateo Bridge and tossed him into the bay. He struggled slightly. Thurmond continued on, detailing all the letters and phone calls he and Holmes had made to the Hart family. He also told police that Holmes was staying at the California Hotel right in San Jose, and as far as he knew, Holmes was there right now. FBI agents and police then took Thurmond to the hotel. It was nearly 4 a.m. on Thursday morning. The agents had Thurmond knock on the door several times. After a minute or two, a voice was heard behind the door. "Who is it?" "It's me, Harold," replied Thurmond. Police heard the door being unbolted, and as soon as it opened, they rushed in. Jack Holmes, still in his underwear, was pounded to the floor and taken into custody. Sheriff Emig was concerned about the mood of people in San Jose. The abduction of young Brooke had angered the entire county. The Harts were one of the most respected and well-known families in the area. They employed hundreds of citizens in their business, and just about everyone had met a Hart family member at one time or another. Because of his concern, Sheriff Emig and the FBI took Holmes to San Francisco, where the interrogation continued. At first, Holmes denied being part of the scheme, and said that he had never called the Hart family. But agents soon convinced Holmes that he had to cooperate since the truth was already known. I, John Maurice Holmes, in the presence of Sheriff Emig of Santa Clara County Police, make this statement voluntarily. The FBI report begins. Holmes recited his involvement in the crime and told police how he planned the abduction with Harold Thurman. He said that he observed Brooke on several occasions prior to November 9th and thought it would be better to snatch the young man when he could be found alone. From the very beginning, Holmes said, he could not think of a place to hold Brooke while negotiations went on. "You know, the smart thing is to dump that guy overboard someplace," Holmes said to Thurman before the kidnapping. Later, when they had Brooke on the San Mateo Bridge, Holmes said he knocked the victim to the ground. Then Harold got the wire and started wrapping his feet and hands. I hit him pretty hard. I wanted him to know that we meant business. Harold got the 2 concrete blocks and tied them around his feet, and we tossed him overboard. Holmes's statement added one important detail. He said that after they dumped Brooke into the bay, he managed to free himself from the wire. When they saw the young man thrashing about in the water, yelling for help, they decided to act. Harold took the gun and climbed down on the stringers and fired the cartridges that were in the pistol. Holmes told police that Harold fired several shots at Hart until the noise stopped and all was quiet. Then, Holmes said, he drove home where he met his wife and took her to the local picture show. According to author Harry Farrell, author of Swift Justice, the movie showing that night was Disney's The Three Little Pigs. Soon, the details of Holmes' confession were public. Rumors of additional crimes committed by the suspects soon circulated throughout the county. The next day, a San Jose newspaper published an editorial titled "Human Devils." In it, the suggestion of what should be done with the suspects was made very clear. According to Farrell, the editorial said, "If mob violence could ever be justified, it would be in a case like this, and we believe the general public will agree with us," the editorial said. "If you could have been with the writer who called at the Hart home to offer our sympathy, it would have made you feel like going out and committing a lynching yourself." "Hart boy slain," kidnapper says, said the Washington Times. "Concrete blocks used in Hart murder" was the headline in the Washington News on November 17th. "Let justice be swift," said one San Francisco newspaper. "Seek noose for Hart killers," said another. Everywhere, but especially in the Southern California area, the media offered a nonstop barrage of sensational headlines that kept the public on the edge of their seats. Nowhere were the passions as high as in Santa Clara and Alameda counties. Federal agents continued to question the subjects throughout the night. "The sheriff and his deputy and the chief of police being merely onlookers," said one FBI report of the interrogation. It was later decided that both suspects undergo psychological tests to ascertain their mental state and prepare for a possible insanity defense. Dr. Frederick Prusher, chief pathologist from the county hospital, supervised the exam. But when he tried to interview Thurman in his cell about his actions during the kidnapping, he refused to cooperate. "My brother told me not to talk," he said. "I'd rather not say anything about it." Prusher later issued a report that both men were normal and displayed no signs of mental defects. The prisoners were transported back to San Jose and remanded to the county jail on Market Street. In the meantime, the Hart family was trying to accept the possibility that Brooke was probably dead. They consented to an interview with the San Francisco Chronicle in which Alex Hart talked about his grief. "My boy is gone," he told the press. "Neither words nor actions either can bring him back. Mrs. Hart is well. She is as well as can be expected, but she is confined to her room under the care of physicians and nurses." Miriam and Elise, Brooke's sisters, were taking the news hard and declined to be seen in public. "They are well and very brave," Alex Hart said. "They are a great comfort to us during this difficult period." As he spoke, Hart walked among his flower gardens while the press followed behind him. "Everyone has been so kind," he continued, "and there is not a single member of this family who is not deeply appreciative of the consideration we have received." On November 13th, a police search party turned up a white pillowcase floating in the waters off the Alameda County coastline. The item was brought to Sheriff Emmig's office for further examination. It was known that one of Brooke Hart's close friends, child actor Jackie Coogan, had lost a similar pillowcase while he and Brooke were at a football game. Speculation was that it somehow wound up in Brooke's car and was tossed into the bay by the kidnappers. Coogan was called in to view the item but denied it belonged to him. Word circulated around town that prior to dumping Brooke Hart into the sea, his kidnappers had placed a pillowcase over his head. To the public, it was very much like an execution. Police divers continued their search for Brooke Hart in the murky waters of San Francisco Bay. As they scoured the bottom of the channel near the San Mateo Bridge, other officers used grappling hooks from rowboats to drag the muddy flats for possible remains. Almost 2 weeks had passed since the day of the kidnapping, and if the confessions were reliable, Hart would have been in the water since November 9th. At the lower portion of the bridge, police found evidence that Hart was still alive when he was thrown into the water and may have even tried to climb the steel columns. A ring of broken and clawed barnacles on one of the piles high above the waterline. The San Francisco Chronicle reported, showed where the boy had clung, desperately hurt, in a frantic battle of youth against death, weakened by the loss of blood and possible wounds inflicted by his 2 confessed murderers. His cries lessened as he slipped into the dark waters. Though Hart was a strong swimmer, it was doubtful if he could have held on for long after being hit with a rock and perhaps several gunshots. Divers at the bridge location retrieved a quantity of baling wire and several concrete blocks. Strands of blonde hair were plainly visible on a section of the wire. Police became revitalized by the discovery. Following the tide tables of November 9th and 10, and making an educated guess, they concentrated their search on the western side of the bay and along the rocky shoreline. Investigators knew that in the past, bodies drifted from the bridge area onto the mudflats of the Alameda shore. On the morning of November 26th, 2 Redwood City residents, who were hunting for ducks, noticed a small bundle floating in the water less than 1 mile south of the San Mateo Bridge. When they saw it was a corpse, they pulled it on board and notified the coroner's office in Alameda County. The body was decomposed and severely damaged by crabs and eels. The face and hair had been eaten away, and the hands and feet were destroyed. Dr. Pressure, who performed the post-mortem examination, told the press, "The remains were hardly recognizable. The abdomen had been entirely removed, and practically all of the upper portion of the body was missing. However, the clothes were still mostly intact. There was also a gold clasp inserted into the shirt's collar. The arrow shirt and the pants were the same kind carried by the Hart's department store." One of Hart's closest friends, Charles O'Brien, was summoned to the coroner's office. After careful consideration, he was able to positively identify the remains as that of Brooke Hart. Only a few hours after Brooke Hart was found, someone threw a rock at the front door of the county jail in downtown San Jose. Sensing a wave of rising public anger over the Hart case and the possibility that Thurmond and Holmes may get off with an insanity plea, a San Francisco newspaper published an editorial on November 17th, urging the death penalty to the accused. "Officers of the Department of Justice, FBI, have struck swiftly and decisively," the article said. "They have put the fear of the law into the hearts of other criminals, whose warped and degenerate minds may have been planning other similar atrocities. As for the guilty, the facts of the case call for swift punishment. Death. No 2 men will ever mount the scaffold with less sympathy." Threats of lynching and vigilante justice were everywhere. At Santa Clara University, rumors were rampant that a group of Brooke's friends were planning an assault on the jail. The sheriff's office was aware of the highly emotional state of San Jose's citizens, and knew that there was a strong possibility of violence. The lurid details of the killing had been published in the newspapers ever since November 16th, the day of Holmes's arrest. His statement, that he and Thurmond had tied up Brooke and thrown him into the bay, had inflamed the public. When it was revealed that they also shot at Brooke while he thrashed around in the dark waters, people were livid. In San Jose, the news of the discovery of the body spread like an epidemic. Hundreds of phone calls asking for confirmation were made to the police and local newspapers. Crowds gathered at the sheriff's office where police had moved in large trucks and barricades. The jailhouse doors were locked and secured. Behind them, heavy weapons were handed out to deputies with warnings that a mob was gathering outside. The FBI, however, made an inquiry at the jail and was told there was no immediate threat. According to a memo written a few days earlier by Agent V.W. Hughes to Director Hoover, he was assured that an assault on the county jail was not imminent. Mr. Vetterli stated that contrary to the newspaper observation, there was no crowd outside. There was no indication or evidence of any possible violence. But by Friday night, November 26th, the mood had changed. The outrage over the killing of Brooke Hart was brewing like a hurricane in Santa Clara County. By 6 p.m. on November 26th, hundreds of men had gathered by the county jail in San Jose. They milled around the entrance and out back of the building on First Street. A few burning torches were lit and placed in trash barrels along Market Street, and the sound of angry voices was heard on every city corner. Rumors of an insanity verdict were very strong, and the possibility that the suspects would somehow escape justice incited the restless crowd. Every few minutes someone would throw a bottle or a rock at the entrance to the jail. Inside, Sheriff Emig had reinforced the doors that led outside by bracing wooden 2x4s against its handles. Police turned off the inside lights on the first floor so as not to give a clear target. "Give them to us," one man yelled. Sheriff Emig watched the men from the jail window. As soon as the crowd saw him, they reacted. "Give them up, Sheriff," another demanded. "We'll take care of them." More people began to assemble along Market Street and around the corner in front of the Hall of Records. Several cars were parked at St. John's Street and St. James Street, blocking access for regular traffic. Nervous deputies waited anxiously behind the iron doors of the jail. Through the bars on the windows, they saw familiar faces of neighbors and friends in the mob. Inside their cells, Thurmond and Holmes paced back and forth like caged animals. "It doesn't look good," Holmes said to one of the deputies. At about 8 p.m., one of the trapped deputies, apparently acting on his own, fired a tear gas shell into the crowd on Market Street. Hundreds of people scattered and ran into the adjoining alleys, but the mob became enraged. They threw rocks and bricks into the windows of the jailhouse, shattering glass and debris all over the sidewalk. They began to strip tiles off the nearby post office building and toss them at the parked police cars. Police fired an additional volley of tear gas into the alley below, sending people running for cover. Across the street, over 1,000 citizens had gathered in St. James Park. More could be seen headed toward the park, where torches were ignited and shouts of defiance could be heard. "Turn them over! Hang the bastards!" they yelled. By 9 p.m., the mob had grown to over 5,000, most of whom milled around St. James Park making noise, lighting fires, and on occasion tossing pieces of iron pipe, bottles, and bricks toward the jail. Telephone wires had been destroyed, so police had no way to call for reinforcements. Sheriff Emig ordered his men to take all weapons and hide them on the 3rd floor. If the mob succeeded in getting inside the jail, he did not want more bloodshed. "We had enough guns to kill 1,000 people, the sheriff later told the local press, but we didn't want to do it. At about 10 p.m., a messenger brought news to the sheriff that they were coming into the jail at 11 and that police should not interfere. By 11 p.m., the temper of the mob was near hysteria. Sheriff Emig knew that he and his few deputies stood virtually no chance of repelling an assault. He ordered his men to do what they could, but not to use any firearms. Wooden barricades that were placed in front of the building were broken down and thrown at the jail. In the alleyway facing the courthouse, another hostile crowd had gathered. They tossed an assortment of debris at the side windows where police ducked for cover under desks and in closets. Directly opposite the jail, where a post office was under construction, dozens of angry men tore down a length of heavy steel pipe. Using it as a battering ram, the men pounded on the front doors of the jail. "Let's go, boys," one man shouted. "Turn them over to the sheriff." Within minutes, a second gang of about 20 men grabbed another length of 8-inch pipe and used it as a second ram. Upstairs, police fired a round of tear gas, which sent some of the crowd away, but could not stop the assault on the front doors. In less than 5 minutes, the old steel doors caved in and crashed to the floor. Hundreds rushed into the jail. One local youth, Anthony Cataldi, 17, later told reporters, "I was the first one of the gang to break into the jail." Vicious fights broke out between the hopelessly outnumbered cops and the furious mob. Sheriff Emig was trampled to the floor and suffered a skull fracture. The other deputies were quickly overcome and tossed aside. In one solid mass, the excited horde charged up to the second floor, where Thurmond and Holmes cowered in their cells, paralyzed with fear. The jailkeeper was knocked unconscious, and his keys were ripped from his leather belt. The frenzied men quickly located the prisoners and dragged them from their cells, kicking and screaming. Holmes was a big man, over 6 feet tall and in good shape. He put up a vicious fight, knocking several of the assailants to the ground. With wild whoops, which drew thousands of onlookers homeward bound from nearby theaters, the mob raced with their prisoners to St. James Park, is how one newspaper described the scene. At first, they grabbed the wrong prisoner, leaving Thurmond in his cell. The man screamed for his life that he was not one of Hart's killers. When they realized their mistake, the mob threw him down the steps of the jail and returned to get Thurmond. Their cries for mercy were lost in the angry roar of the crowd, said the Chronicle the next day. Though he tried to fight, Thurmond was beaten senseless and apparently not aware of anything after he was taken from the cell. In the meantime, the throng at St. James Park had grown to thousands of people. Some estimates put the size at over 10,000 citizens. Burning torches lit up the grounds as Thurmond and Holmes were dragged feet first into the park. People kicked the prisoners, hit them with tree branches, and threw bricks at the helpless men as they passed by. "How do you like it?" they yelled. "Murderers! Killers!" they screamed. The more Holmes fought, the more the crowd retaliated against him. He managed to knock several of his tormentors to the ground, but suffered terrible injuries along the way. By then, the mob was in a fury. They dragged the prisoners to the northern corner of the park. A youth quickly scurried up a tall elm tree with a length of rope and tossed it over a large branch about 20 feet from the ground. "I went out to my father's ranch and got some rope for the hanging," he later told reporters. The other end was fastened into a noose and pulled over Holmes' head. He managed to get it off his neck, but several men quickly beat him into submission. A few yards away, a noose was placed around Thurmond's neck without a problem. He had never regained consciousness since he was taken from his cell. Then several men hoisted Thurmond up 10 feet off the ground. Meanwhile, Holmes continued to resist until the mob broke both his arms. Then he was stripped naked and the rope firmly knotted around his neck. He was lifted up while he kicked frantically into the air. Thousands cheered when they saw the kidnappers hanging from the tree limbs. Some applauded. Illuminated by car headlights and dozens of flashlights, the two men dangled from the trees. A few women fainted. Some of the lynchers held burning matches under Holmes's feet while others shouted their approval. A sock caught fire and burned for several minutes as spectators yelled, "Burn! Burn!" Motorists who were passing by were drawn to the scene by the yelling and cheering. They parked their cars along First Street and wandered in to investigate the commotion. At the height of the lynching, over 10,000 people were inside St. James Park. Only a few brave souls had tried to stop it. The New York Times later reported, police and officers who had been on guard kept carefully away from the park, watching the action of the mob from the opposite side of the wide street. Press people from the local newspapers snapped dozens of photographs and easily recognized many of their neighbors. For hours afterward, people roamed through the park and children played nearby while the naked bodies of Thurmond and Holmes swayed in the gentle night breeze. A telegram sent by an FBI agent to Washington, D.C. on November 27th reported the events at St. James Park to the Home Office. It read, "Hart kidnapping subjects Thurmond and Holmes under state custody in San Jose were taken by the mob and lynched midnight tonight." The front page of the New York Times on November 27, 1933 read, "Batter down jail door. Leaders at San Jose seize 2 kidnappers, string them to trees." The Washington Post said, "Here is the story of 5,000 persons who went mad. Only an army could have stopped double hang." Across the nation, newspapers reported on the lynching in San Jose, calling the mob crazy, bloodthirsty, and savage. Many reflected on how such a thing could happen in a quiet, civilized town like San Jose. Oakland's Post-Inquirer called it vigilante justice for Brook Hart slayers, while the Washington News said, "Lynchings inspire fear of God." In San Jose, most people were satisfied that the kidnappers got what was coming to them, though not all agreed with the method used. St. James Park was a shambles, and curiosity seekers still roamed about, looking for souvenirs from the lynching. Many people cut off pieces of the trees where Thurmond and Holmes met their end. City employees were forced to construct wooden boxes around the trees to prevent them from being cut to pieces. It was an outburst characterized by hysteria and ribaldry, said the New York Times, with a frenzied rush for souvenirs after the naked bodies of the slayers were cut down. Dozens of heavily armed police patrolled around the park while authorities surveyed the damage to the jailhouse. Sheriff William Enig and his deputy suffered concussions and were still in the hospital. The bodies of Thurmond and Holmes lay at the county morgue, ironically, alongside Brooke Hart. They remained there, together in death, until late that morning when the Hart family had Brooke removed to a funeral home. In the meantime, telegrams of praise poured into San Jose and the governor's office. "Congratulations," said one. "I am happy in the knowledge that the people of San Jose have expressed their revolt against crooked attorneys and too lenient parole board by killing the fiendish murderers of Brooke Hart." Another said, "Congratulations. The grand jury should meet and adjourn. Case closed." A telegram from Kansas City said, "Lynching is a sincere demand for law enforcement. I congratulate the people of California for their noble example in dealing with criminals." The chief of the State Bureau of Investigation said to the press, "It is to be regretted but necessary that the people took the law into their own hands, but they serve notice on gangsters that there is no place for them in California." But nowhere was the support for vigilante justice more blatant and more enthusiastic than in the governor's office. The day after the lynching, Governor James Rolph expressed his approval of the double murder at St. James Park. "If anyone is arrested for this good job, I'll pardon them all." The aroused people of that fine city of San Jose were so enraged. It was only natural that, peaceful and law-abiding as they are, they should rise and offer swift justice to these two murderers and kidnappers. Rolph said that he would like to release all the kidnappers and murderers in San Quentin and Folsom prisons and deliver them to the patriotic San Jose citizens who know how to handle such a situation. On November 28th, the Chronicle reported that Governor Rolph had actually inquired at San Quentin to ask how many kidnappers were currently being held inside the prison. In the months after the murders of Harold Thurmond and Jack Holmes, accusations of who was responsible for the violence at St. James Park flew back and forth. Some people wanted to blame the sheriff's office for not taking adequate precautions against the mob when he knew that there was a strong possibility of violence. Sheriff Emig denied it, and the coroner's inquest agreed. The jury said Sheriff Emig used his best judgment in handling the situation to avoid a lynching of the prisoners. Others wanted to blame the Department of Justice, whose agents were the lead investigators on the case. But ever since November 27th, the FBI was careful to point out that at the time of the siege, the prisoners were in the state's custody. In an official Department of Justice synopsis of the case, which is dated February 27, 1934, reports emphasize the responsibility rests with the state of California. It is to be noted that at the time this lynching occurred, both Holmes and Thurmond were completely in the custody of state officials. Eventually, 7 men, including Anthony Cataldi, were arrested on various charges connected to the killings. District Attorney Earl Warren, later to become Chief Justice of the U.S. Supreme Court, led the effort to prosecute the suspects. In the months after Governor Rolph professed his support for mob violence, he received strong criticisms from many different fronts. He was frequently called Governor Lynch, and newspapers across the nation vilified his comments on the murders. The National War Veterans expelled him from their executive board, and numerous public officials called for his impeachment. However, Governor Rolph was never able to make good on his promise to pardon the lynchers. In June 1934, barely 8 months after the killings, Rolph died in Santa Clara County of a heart attack, the result, some said, of the stress brought on by the San Jose case. The repercussions of San Jose justice extended overseas as well. But perhaps none were so telling as comments made by the Nazi Party, who in 1933 was just beginning their satanic rise to power in Germany. In their national magazine, published in 1934, the Nazis published photographs of the lynchings in St. James Park and used the killings as examples of the decadence of American life. In 1936, Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer released Fury, starring Spencer Tracy, Sylvia Sidney, and Walter Brennan. Written and directed by Fritz Lang, who had barely escaped with his life from Nazi Germany. The script was based on the terrible events at San Jose 3 years earlier. Its harrowing depiction of lynch mobs was unforgettable and strongly reminiscent of those at St. James Park. The comparison did not escape the notice of American audiences. The film received an Oscar nomination for Best Story. Though many thousands witnessed the events of November 26, 1933 in San Jose, no one was ever convicted of any crime related to the lynchings of Thurmond and Holmes.